Hello, everyone, we've all been there. A whirlwind romance, deep conversations, sweet promises, then suddenly, silence, no calls, no texts, radio silence. You sit there wondering if it was all in your head. Was it something you said? Did Mercury retrograde strike again? But then, out of nowhere, he returns. Why? Because men, just like most humans, often don't realize what they've lost until it's gone. See, here's the thing. When you go no contact, you're not playing games. You're reclaiming your peace. You're sending out a message loud and clear. I'm not here to chase. I'm here to choose. In that silence, he begins to feel the void. The attention, the energy, the light you brought into his life, it's missing. And suddenly, the world feels a little colder without your warmth. The memes aren't as funny. The nights are a bit quieter. And that grass is greener fantasy turns out it's just plastic turf. But let's be real, this isn't just about him. It's about you. When you stop reaching out, you start reaching inward. You remember who you are. That woman who knows her worth. The woman who doesn't settle for crumbs because she knows she's the whole damn cake. So why does he come back? He comes back because now he sees the glow, the one he took for granted. He returns not because he's had a sudden revelation of your brilliance, but because your absence forced him to confront it. But here's the twist. When men return after no contact, it's often because they realize the value of what they lost in your absence. This realization doesn't always hit like a lightning bolt. It's usually slow, creeping, and uncomfortable. In the initial days or weeks after no contact begins, especially if it's initiated by the woman, many men don't immediately feel the full weight of what they're missing. There's a kind of ego buffer. They assume the door is still open, that you'll reach out first, that your silence is temporary. They misread your peace as a pause, not a decision. But as time goes on and you remain silent, something begins to shift. That silence starts speaking louder than any words ever could. In relationships, women often bring a certain emotional depth, nurturing energy, and presence that is sometimes taken for granted until it's no longer there. It's like air, invisible but vital. He might not have noticed the daily check-ins, the encouragement, the laughs, or even the small fights that reflected how much you cared. But when those disappear, he's left alone with a mirror and his own echo. It doesn't matter how independent or emotionally detached someone claims to be. Humans crave connection, and they especially miss meaningful ones when they're gone. What makes this realization more intense for men is that society rarely encourages them to process emotions immediately. Many are taught to suppress, distract, or replace rather than reflect. So instead of sitting with the discomfort of missing someone, a man might go out with friends, swipe through dating apps, or throw himself into work. But none of these distractions truly fill the gap. They're just noise, and silence always returns when the noise fades. That's when the truth starts creeping in. He realizes that while others might be available, they aren't you. They don't get his jokes the same way. They don't understand his silences, and they don't challenge him like you did. That level of connection isn't easily duplicated. Men come back not because they suddenly gained new wisdom overnight, but because they finally felt your absence in a way that became undeniable. It starts in small ways: a song you both loved, a restaurant you introduced him to, an inside joke no one else gets. Then it hits harder moments when he needs comfort, clarity, or even someone to share good news with, and there's no one on the other end. He scrolls through his phone and realizes that no one feels right to text. The gap is emotional, not just physical. This return is less about you being the only woman in the world and more about you being irreplaceable in his world. Your essence, your energy, your presence, they're not interchangeable. And when you go no contact, you stop pouring into him. You stop making things easy. That's when the scales tip. He no longer has the emotional upper hand. Instead of being the one in control, he's now the one waiting. Waiting for a response, a sign, a second chance. But here's the deeper layer. Men often return because your absence forced them to confront themselves. Without you there to buffer, to explain, to support, they're left with their own emotional mess. Maybe they avoided vulnerability, maybe they feared commitment, maybe they pushed you away because they didn't feel ready, but with the distraction of your love removed, they have to face the why, and that's a painful but necessary step. Sometimes the absence of someone forces the presence of self-awareness. This dynamic isn't limited to romantic relationships. It's a human truth. We often understand value most clearly in hindsight. And when a woman who gave her all walks away quietly, confidently, and without a dramatic exit, it unsettles everything. That grace, that restraint, that strength, it's haunting. It makes a man question his own decisions. It makes him see what he overlooked, and in doing so, it opens a loop in his mind that he feels compelled to close. Many times, men don't return out of love, they return out of discomfort. They don't like the feeling of being shut out. The certainty they once had about your availability is gone, and that lack of access creates urgency. They remember the comfort of your presence, the emotional labor you did, the warmth of your words. They remember how you listened, how you supported, how you made them feel seen, and they return not just to rekindle a relationship, but to recapture that feeling. But here's the truth. The woman he returns to after no contact is never the same woman he left. The time apart, the silence, the growth they changed her. She's no longer seeking closure or validation. She's not waiting to be chosen. She knows her worth now, not as a concept, but as a practice. She's become whole on her own, and while his return might seem like a victory to him, for her, it's simply a mirror reflecting how far she's come. So yes, men often return after no contact, but not because they're heroes realizing a grand mistake. They return because silence is powerful, because absence is a teacher, and because the woman they left behind became a woman they can no longer afford to ignore. No contact isn't a game, it's a statement of self, worth, and emotional boundaries. Too often, when someone decides to go silent after a breakup or emotional fallout, it gets misunderstood. People say she's playing hard to get, or it's a strategy to make him miss her. But for women who truly know their value, no contact isn't manipulation, it's liberation. It's the clearest, strongest way of saying, I will no longer pour into someone who refuses to meet me halfway. In a world that constantly pressures women to explain themselves, to fix things, to always be available emotionally, choosing silence is radical. It's choosing yourself, because here's the truth. When someone disrespects your presence, your voice, your love silence speaks louder than any conversation ever could. You're not ghosting them. You're prioritizing yourself. You're stepping back, not out of spite, but out of strength. There's an assumption that love means staying, pushing, trying harder. But real love, especially self-love, sometimes means letting go with dignity. No contact is not about revenge. It's not about hoping he notices your absence and crawls back. It's about cutting the energetic cord that kept you tied to a situation where you were undervalued. It's not passive-aggressive. It's power, delivered calmly and with clarity. Think about it. When you stop texting first, when you stop checking his stories, when you stop showing up emotionally, you reclaim your time, your peace, and your perspective. Suddenly, the fog clears. You're no longer reacting to his actions or lack thereof. You're no longer in a cycle of waiting and wondering. You've removed yourself from the equation not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. And yes, it's hard. Silence can feel unbearable in the beginning. You question if you're doing the right thing. You wonder if you're being too harsh. But with time, the strength in your decision becomes undeniable. You start to realize that someone who truly cared wouldn't have pushed you to this point. that you are always worth consistent effort, not just reactive attention. No contact also exposes the truth of a relationship. When you pull back, you get clarity. If he doesn't check in, doesn't step up, doesn't notice, that tells you everything you need to know. If he does return, the way he returns tells you even more. Is he reaching out to genuinely connect and acknowledge his shortcomings, or just to regain access to your energy? See, when you stay in contact after being hurt, you're often negotiating your worth without realizing it. You're saying, even though I'm not being treated right, I'm still here. No contact flips that script. It says, unless I'm treated with respect, I remove access to me. It's not cruel, it's clear. It creates a boundary that is not open for discussion. It sets the bar for how you will and will not be treated, and there's beauty in that, because when you choose silence, you're not waiting, you're evolving. You're investing that time in yourself. You're healing, growing, rediscovering your strength. You're no longer the woman who accepted the bare minimum. You're the woman who knows she's the prize. No contact is also an invitation not for him, but for yourself. To realign with your values, to reconnect with your peace, to stop shrinking or over-explaining in order to be loved. It reminds you that love is not supposed to be confusing, conditional, or exhausting. It's supposed to feel like home, not like a battle. So when people say no contact is a tactic, let them think that. You'll know better. You'll know that it's a declaration of inner strength, a reminder that you're not here to chase or convince anyone of your worth. You're here to be loved fully, honestly, and freely, and if someone can't do that, they don't get access to you. No contact isn't cold, it's calm, it's clarity, it's the decision to stop proving and start protecting. Because your energy is sacred, your peace is non-negotiable, and your worth, it doesn't need constant validation, it just needs to be recognized. That's why no contact isn't a move on the chessboard of relationships. It's a full stop, a pause, not to punish someone else, but to prioritize yourself. And when that boundary is in place, anyone who wants to be in your life will have to rise to meet it or get left behind. Your silence creates space that highlights the absence of your presence, energy, and attention. When you remove yourself from someone's life, truly remove yourself, without drama, explanation, or guilt, it doesn't just leave a gap. It creates a vacuum that can't be ignored. That silence becomes louder than any words you could have spoken. It lingers in the empty conversations, in the missed phone calls, in the spaces where your presence once filled the room with warmth, laughter, and grounding energy. What many people don't realize is that emotional presence is not always loud or demanding. It's the quiet reliability. It's the good morning texts. It's the way you listen, encourage, and make someone feel seen. It's the emotional labor you do without keeping score. And when that's gone, not just physically, but energetically, the absence becomes jarring. At first, he might not notice. He might even feel relief, mistaking your silence for compliance, or believing you'll come back like you always did. But that's the illusion, because your silence isn't about waiting, it's about resetting. In that reset, he begins to feel the shift, the moments when he picks up his phone and doesn't see your name. The days that go by without your voice in his life. It builds, the silence begins to echo, and suddenly he starts to realize what was always there. The consistency, the effort, the emotional security you brought now gone, not because you disappeared, but because you chose to protect your peace. People often underestimate the impact of quiet distance. It's not passive, it's powerful. It gives the other person room to think, and not in a convenient, surface-level way. It forces introspection. Your absence forces reflection. It makes him replay conversations, remember little details, and question why he doesn't feel the same spark with anyone else. Why does the attention from others feel shallow? Why do new connections feel tiring, not exciting? because none of them are you. That energy you brought was uniquely yours. The way you showed up, the emotional safety you provided, the balance of softness and strength, these things can't be replaced or duplicated. And in the silence, he's reminded that what he thought was ordinary was actually extraordinary. It wasn't just love, it was presence, and presence leaves a mark when it's gone. This is where the dynamic changes. When you were there, he might have taken you for granted, not necessarily out of malice, but out of comfort. Familiarity breeds complacency, but when you pull back, that comfort turns into a void. Suddenly, the things he didn't appreciate become the things he misses most. Your patience, your laughter, your silence, even the way you could just be with him without needing to fill every moment. And what's more powerful is that your silence doesn't beg, it doesn't plead. It doesn't perform, it just is. It sits with dignity, it doesn't chase, and that's unsettling, especially for someone who was used to being met halfway or more. The silence is undeniable proof that you've changed the terms. You're no longer available at the cost of your peace. You're no longer accessible without intention. This isn't about playing a role or being strategic. This is about alignment. When you pull your energy back, you're sending a message that words could never carry. I am no longer holding space where it isn't honored. And even if he doesn't say it out loud, he feels it in the quiet of his own thoughts. In the moments where he reaches for his phone, hesitates, and then puts it down. In the nights that stretch too long without the comfort of knowing you're still there, he might reach out. He might try to fill the silence. But the truth is, by the time he truly feels your absence, you've already started to reclaim your presence for yourself. The energy you used to give so freely is now being redirected into your own healing, your own growth, your own joy. And that transformation is silent too, but it's loud in its impact. This is the magic of quiet strength. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply withdraws from places that can't hold it. And in doing so, it reveals the true weight of what was lost. Your silence doesn't just remove noise, it invites clarity, and anyone who genuinely values you will feel that silence as a wake-up call, not a punishment, because in the end, silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the presence of self-respect. It's the declaration that you no longer show up where you're not seen. And once you embrace that kind of silence, it becomes impossible to settle for anything less than being deeply, truly valued. Men often romanticize the past once they no longer have access to it. It's a pattern as old as time. When something or someone is consistently present, it's easy to overlook the value it brings. Familiarity creates comfort, but comfort often breeds complacency. Many men don't fully realize the emotional richness, depth, and significance of the connection they had until it's no longer available to them. The person they once had instant access to, the one who cared deeply, reached out often, loved openly, is suddenly gone. Not in a dramatic storm of words, but in a quiet, intentional retreat. That's when memory begins to play tricks on the mind. That's when the romanticizing begins. At first, they may remember only the highlights. The laughter, the intimacy, the late night talks that felt like the world disappeared and only you two existed. The way you made them feel safe, admired, accepted. When you're around constantly, those moments feel normal. Expected, but when you're gone, they become golden. The mind wraps them in nostalgia, softens the flaws, and sharpens the beauty. This isn't necessarily because men are manipulative. It's because the human brain is wired to hold on to emotionally charged experiences, especially when there's longing attached to them. Once the door is closed, they begin to replay the real differently. That restaurant you loved together isn't just a place to eat anymore, it becomes your spot. A song that once played in the background now suddenly feels personal. The scent you wore, the way you laughed, your unique phrases, they haunt the empty spaces. And it's not just what they remember, but how they remember it. You become this glowing, idealized version of what they didn't appreciate enough when they had the chance. That's the power of absence. It amplifies value. When they had you, they might have complained about small things. Maybe you were too emotional, too available, or too much. But now, those same things are reframed. Suddenly, your emotional depth becomes passion. Your attention becomes loyalty. Your intensity becomes rare. This romanticization happens because, in retrospect, they no longer have to engage with the reality of the relationship, just the edited version that suits their longing. In essence, they fall in love with the memory, not necessarily with you as you are now. And that's where the danger lies for them. Because what they're yearning for is a connection frozen in time, not the evolving, self-aware woman you've become. They're looking back with a selective lens, forgetting that the relationship didn't end in silence for no reason. There were unmet needs, ignored boundaries, and misaligned values. But when they're left to sit in the stillness of your absence, they hold on to what was good, because that's what comforts them. The longing for something familiar, something once certain, something that made them feel seen even if they didn't fully return that energy when it mattered. It's often not until they're confronted with the inadequacy of new connections that the past starts looking better than it really was. New dates might lack depth, flirtation without foundation might feel empty. Conversations might feel surface level, and in contrast, your authenticity shines brighter even in memory. That's when regret creeps in. That's when they think, she got me in ways no one else has. And the urge to reach back out begins to brew. Not always with accountability, but with a nostalgic desire to reconnect with the feeling they associate with you. But here's what's crucial. The past they're romanticizing was built on the version of you who hadn't outgrown the situation yet. You were different then, perhaps more patient, more forgiving, more willing to compromise. The version of you they remember doesn't exist anymore. Silence, healing, and self-respect have transformed you. You've had time to reflect, evolve, and redefine what you want. So while they're lost in a fantasy of the past, you're grounded in the reality of your future. This is the point where your paths diverge. He may return, drawn by the warmth of a memory, but you'll know that you are no longer that memory. You are the growth that came after. The romanticized version of the past might look beautiful, but it no longer fits the present version of you. That's the irony. While he clings to a ghost of what was, you're living in the truth of what is, and that truth no longer settles for less than it deserves. So yes, men do romanticize the past. They do miss what they had often too late. They do return, driven by memories that feel better in hindsight than they ever did in reality. But by then, you've likely outgrown the love story they're trying to relive, because you're not a highlight reel, you're a whole person moving forward, not stuck in rewind. When a man pulls away and you go no contact, what you're doing, consciously or not, is forcing him to sit in the discomfort he's spent so long avoiding. You stop buffering his emotional immaturity. You stop absorbing the weight of a one-sided connection. You stop being the one who reaches out, who explains, who holds space, and suddenly he's alone with the emotional mess he created but never wanted to look at. That silence, that distance, it strips away the distractions and leaves him face with the truth, not just about you, but about himself. See, many men have been socialized to avoid emotional confrontation, not just with others, but within themselves. They are told from an early age that vulnerability is weakness, that needing someone is a flaw, that feelings should be handled in private or ignored altogether. So when they start to feel overwhelmed in a relationship, whether that's due to fear of intimacy, emotional unavailability, or a lack of self-awareness, they often pull back. They disconnect, they go quiet. Sometimes they ghost, sometimes they breadcrumb, and sometimes they give vague explanations that avoid accountability. It's not always malicious, sometimes it's deeply unconscious, but the result is the same. They escape the emotional depth they aren't ready to handle. But when you go no contact, you remove the emotional cushion they've been relying on. You no longer carry the burden of their unreadiness, and that absence, your absence, is what creates the mirror. Without you engaging, explaining, or trying to fix things, he has no choice but to sit with the fallout of his choices. He starts to feel the emptiness of his own emotional distance. The clarity that comes in your silence isn't just about missing you, it's about meeting himself in ways he's avoided for far too long. Because here's the truth. Emotional accountability isn't just about apologizing to someone else. It's about recognizing patterns within yourself, and often, men who return after no contact have gone through an inner reckoning they couldn't have faced while you were still in their orbit. While you were there, it was easy to deflect, to blame, to escape into temporary pleasures. But when you withdraw, they're left with nothing to react to, no push and pull, no emotional labor being done on their behalf, just silence, and in that silence, questions begin to surface. Why did I shut down? Why couldn't I let her in? Why did I act distant, cold, or avoidant when all she wanted was connection? These aren't easy questions. They are uncomfortable. They disrupt the ego, but they are necessary. And they often don't arise until your presence is gone, until the person who held space for him has stopped showing up entirely. It's not about punishing him. It's about creating space for reflection, the kind that only happens in solitude. This process doesn't happen overnight. At first, he might distract himself, parties, new women, work, anything to avoid sitting still with what he lost, but eventually the distraction wears thin, the excitement fades. And he realizes that nothing has truly filled the void, because the void isn't just the absence of you, it's the presence of his own emotional immaturity staring back at him, and that's where the change can begin if he chooses it. Some men, when faced with that discomfort, grow. They seek therapy, they self-reflect, they learn to take accountability, not just to win you back, but because they're finally confronting themselves honestly. Others, unfortunately, remain stuck. They return not because they've changed, but because they miss comfort, routine, and your emotional labor. The difference between the two, one is seeking connection rooted in growth. The other is seeking relief from loneliness. That's why no contact is so powerful, not just because it gives you space to heal, but because it forces him to face what he's been hiding from, himself. Your absence becomes the catalyst for his potential transformation. It doesn't guarantee growth, but it creates the conditions where growth becomes possible. And for you, you don't wait, you don't hope, you don't put your life on hold for his awakening, you focus on your own. Because when someone isn't emotionally available, the best thing you can do isn't to fix them or convince them to stay, it's to walk away with grace, to let your absence speak where your words were ignored. To know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. So if he returns, it's not the return itself that matters, it's who he is when he shows up. If he's still avoiding himself, still disconnected, still immature, then your silence did its job, it revealed the truth. But if he returns with accountability, growth, and genuine emotional presence, then maybe, just maybe, he faced the mirror you left behind, and that mirror, that was never about breaking him down. It was always about showing him who he really is and giving you the freedom to choose if that's still enough for the woman you've become. When a man loses consistent access to your emotional energy, he begins to understand the power it carried, often too late. We live in a world that downplays emotional labor. It's invisible, it doesn't come with fanfare. It's the late night conversations you initiated when you felt something was off. It's the check-ins you gave without being asked. The thoughtful messages, the quiet emotional attunement, the way you read his moods, buffered his lows, supported his dreams, and often none of that is acknowledged until it's gone. Men, especially those who have never had to consciously examine their own emotional habits, tend to absorb these gestures like air, expected, essential, but unnoticed. You were his safe place, his sounding board, his mirror. And when you're constantly present, that care becomes background noise. It's there always, and so it fades into familiarity. But when you pull your energy back completely, it's like turning off the power in a house that never questioned where the light came from. Suddenly, he's sitting in the dark, and only then does he realize you were the light. At first, it might not register. He may not even flinch. That's the nature of emotional blindness when someone has gotten so used to being supported that they no longer recognize the weight of that support. But time, silence, and distance are powerful teachers. He starts to feel the absence in ways that catch him off guard. The morning that starts without your usual message, the tough day at work that ends in silence because you're no longer the one he can vent to. The decision he once could talk through with you now faced alone. That's when the memories return, and not just the romantic ones. It's the small moments, the warmth in your voice when he was doubting himself, the softness you offered when the world felt hard, the strength you embodied even when you were tired of giving. You were a source of emotional security, and emotional security is rare. It's not glamorous or loud, but it's irreplaceable, and he realizes that no one else offers that same depth. Because what you gave came from a place of genuine care, not performance or pretense. You didn't just love him. You emotionally sustained him. You helped him process, grow, feel. You held him in ways he may not have even realized. But when your energy is gone, not withheld in anger, but simply no longer accessible, it leaves a silence that speaks volumes. That silence reminds him that access to someone's emotional presence is a privilege, not a right. This loss is not just about losing a good woman. It's about losing the emotional equilibrium he never had to consciously work for. It's the realization that without your energy, life feels a little colder, a little quieter, and that isn't just loneliness, it's imbalance. Because when you were in his life, your energy softened his edges. It brought color to his grayscale, and now the colors are gone. He may start to reach out, maybe subtly at first, a story reaction, a just checking in, a memory sent your way, but the truth is, these gestures are rarely just about missing you. They're about missing how you made him feel, and here's the distinction that matters. Is he returning because he values you? Or is he returning because he finally understands the value of the emotional world? You offered him a world he only saw clearly in your absence. Because this is where your power lies, in knowing that emotional energy is not a renewable resource that flows endlessly toward people who don't appreciate it. It's sacred, it's personal, and once you withdraw it, the shift is seismic. It's not about revenge or playing games, it's about alignment. You no longer give from a place of depletion. You give where you are seen, held, and met. His realization that what you gave was rare might come late. That's often how it goes. Many people wake up to the emotional value of someone only after they've lost the connection. But that realization, that's not your responsibility to wait for. Your healing has already begun. Your energy is now being directed inward toward yourself, your peace, your future. So if he returns, it's not your job to prove your worth again. That chapter already told its story. What matters is whether he now recognizes the emotional currency you carried, and whether he's capable of reciprocating it, not just receiving it. Because access to your emotional world must be earned. Not through nostalgia or longing, but through consistency, presence, and growth. You're not a therapist. You're not a savior. You're a whole human being whose love is layered, real, and powerful. And any man who loses that should feel the weight of that loss not because you wished it upon him, but because emotional energy, once gone, leaves behind the echo of everything it once nourished. When a man returns after no contact, it's often not because he suddenly woke up. To love it's because your growth exposed the gap between who he was and who he needed to become. This is the part they don't say out loud. At first, he might think the distance is just space a break, not a breakup. He assumes you'll come back because that's what always happened. The comfort of the pattern lulled him into thinking your presence was permanent, your patience endless. But when you truly detach not out of bitterness, but out of a deep sense of self, worth something shifts. Not just in you, but in how the world reflects you back to him. He starts to see you differently. Why? Because you're no longer functioning from a place of emotional dependence. You're not seeking closure, validation, or even clarity. You've created your own, and that energy, it's magnetic, not the kind of magnetism that comes from seduction or strategy, but the kind that radiates from someone who knows who they are and refuses to shrink again. Your absence stopped being a pause and became a statement. You stopped reaching out, you stopped explaining, you stopped trying to be understood by someone who refused to listen, and in that silence you did the real work, not just moving on, but moving in. Into yourself, your healing, your evolution, your own narrative. The version of you that's thriving without him is not just new, she's unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity stirs discomfort. Especially for a man who once knew you as the woman who gave a little too much, forgave too easily, stayed too long. Suddenly, you're no longer that woman. You're not angry, you're not broken, you're not waiting. You're flourishing, and that contrast, it's confronting. It reflects back to him everything he's not or not yet. That's the unspoken tension when a man returns. He's not just coming back to you, he's coming back to a version of you that now requires more. More presence, more emotional depth, more intentionality, and if he hasn't done the internal work during the silence, he will feel it the moment he tries to re-enter your life. He'll stumble over your boundaries. You'll notice how you don't respond the same way, how your softness is no longer a free pass it's earned, how your time feels more sacred now, and it is. See, growth is not just about becoming better, it's about becoming clear. You now see what you were carrying alone. You see how often you compromised your needs to maintain peace. You understand the patterns, not just his, but your own, and that awareness is the line in the sand. The woman he left is not the woman he's facing now, and deep down he knows that. That's why many men return with confusion, with hesitation, with shallow attempts to reconnect, because they sense the shift, but they haven't matched it. They're drawn to your glow, but intimidated by what it demands. They remember the connection, but underestimate the transformation. They think they can pick up where they left off, not realizing that you've closed that chapter with grace, and you're already writing the next one without them. And if he's not growing too, he won't fit in the new narrative. This is why your evolution matters more than his return, because his comeback isn't the real story your becoming is. If he's still emotionally stagnant, still evading vulnerability, still showing up halfway, he's not coming back for you as you are now. He's coming back for the echo of the woman he left behind, and that woman, she doesn't live here anymore. The beauty of your growth is that it no longer revolves around proving your worth. That's already been established by your silence, your boundaries, your healing. His return, then, is not validation. It's a mirror, one that reflects how far you've come and how far he still has to go if he wants to meet you where you are. And maybe he will, maybe he'll rise to it. Maybe the discomfort of your distance will push him into his own evolution. But whether he does or not isn't your responsibility. You've done your part not by waiting, but by walking forward with clarity. So when he returns, remember, the real transformation didn't happen when he left. It happened in the space where you chose yourself, again and again, quietly, powerfully, relentlessly, and that woman, she's the one he'll never forget because she's the version of you that finally knew her own worth. When men return after no contact, it's often because your silence disrupted their illusion of control. Let's be real, people, especially those used to emotional power dynamics, often assume that if they withdraw or act distant, the other person will chase. This is especially true when you've been emotionally generous, consistently available, and invested in the connection. They come to rely on your reaction as proof of their significance. Your texts, your checking in, your attempts to clarify, fix, or hold on, these become unspoken validations that they still have emotional access to you, even if they're not offering much in return. So when you go silent, truly silent, with no games or manipulation, that illusion begins to collapse. He's not used to it. He's not used to the stillness. He's not used to you not reacting. And here's the thing, many men don't consciously think, I want to control her emotions. It's not always some master plan, but they do get used to the emotional chase. They get used to you holding the emotional thread, pulling it tighter, checking if it's still strong. When you drop it completely, when you disconnect without drama or explanation, that thread goes slack and suddenly they're holding nothing, no safety net, no signal, just absence, and absence is powerful. It creates uncertainty. It makes them realize that the space you once filled is no longer guaranteed, that the emotional attention they took for granted isn't just waiting around, hoping, craving, it's gone. Not because you're trying to punish, but because you finally reclaimed your energy. Control thrives on predictability, and the moment you become unpredictable, not in your values, but in your accessibility, everything shifts. Now they're wondering, why hasn't she reached out? Did she move on? Was she really done? That doubt, it's new to them. It unsettles their ego, especially if they thought you'd always be there, even in silence, just waiting on standby. Suddenly, they're the ones sitting with the questions, and the deeper that silence stretches, the more their imagined version of control unravels. The reality hits, they don't know what you're thinking. They can't sense where you stand, they can't feel your emotional pulse anymore. That discomfort becomes a mirror, one that reflects their own behavior, the pushing, the distance, the inconsistency, and how little power they actually held. And this is the thing, they don't always return because they're ready to offer something real. Often, they return because they need to restore that feeling of control. They want to know that they still matter, that you'll still respond, that they can still get a reaction. It's not always malicious, it's often about soothing their own ego, not reconnecting from a healed place. So the moment you re-engage, they may feel that temporary relief. The balance of power feels restored. She answered, she still cares. But if they haven't grown, they slip back into old patterns because nothing inside them has actually changed. They're just reacting to the discomfort of losing the upper hand. That's why your silence isn't just about withdrawal, it's about sovereignty. It's a statement that you're no longer participating in a dynamic where your emotions are used as a measuring stick for someone else's worth. You've taken your power back, not loudly, not vindictively, but with clarity, and when he comes back, you see it for what it is, a test, not of him, of you. Are you still that version of yourself who needed to be chosen? Or are you now the version who chooses herself so clearly that no one else's validation holds weight? Because when control is no longer part of the dynamic, the connection either grows or it crumbles. And if he hasn't done the work, if he's still driven by ego rather than intention, your silence will have been the loudest boundary you ever set. And here's the truth he may never say out loud. Your silence didn't just hurt, it humbled him. When a man returns after no contact, it's often because he's chasing the unresolved, the version of the story that didn't end on his terms. Let's break that down. Many men are conditioned to initiate, to pursue, and consciously or not to feel like they control the emotional pace of a relationship. Whether it's starting things, pausing them, or walking away, there's often an unspoken assumption that they set the rhythm. So when you go silent, not out of passive aggression, but from healed detachment, you interrupt that rhythm. You end the chapter without his permission, and that unsettles him, because now the story isn't his to finish. You didn't wait for a final word. You didn't ask for closure. You didn't chase after clarity. You created your own. You decided the narrative was no longer serving your peace, and you stepped out. That kind of self-authorship is powerful. It threatens the illusion of emotional dominance, especially for someone who thought he'd always get the last word. And make no mistake, when someone is used to having emotional access to you, your silence is loud. It rewrites the script. It's not just about ignoring him, it's about removing yourself from the cycle entirely. No explanation, no dramatic exit, just a clean, deliberate withdrawal from something that no longer honored your growth. And that kind of ending, it leaves a mark. So when he circles back, it's not always love. It's curiosity, it's ego, it's the itch of an incomplete story. How did she move on so easily? Does she still think about me? Was I really that replaceable? He's not always chasing you, he's chasing the version of events where he still had the final say. He wants the last text, the last word, the last emotional response. Why? Because that would restore the feeling of control he lost the moment you walked away for good. But here's the beautiful truth. You don't owe him the ending he expected. You don't owe him a sequel. You don't owe him access to the woman who no longer lives in the emotional space he abandoned. You grew. You grieved, you rebuilt, and in that process, you realized something radical. You don't need him to understand your peace in order to keep it. That's the power of detachment, not coldness, not bitterness. Clarity, you stopped needing the story to make sense to him. You stopped needing him to validate your pain, your love, your decision to let go. You just honored it for yourself. And now that he's knocking on the door again, it's not about whether he's sincere, it's about whether you're still available for the kind of connection he's capable of offering. And more often than not, men return not because they're ready, but because your exit challenged a part of them they didn't want to confront. You leaving without begging, without explaining, without needing him to feel guilt or regret, that's what haunts them. It makes them wonder if they ever had the power they assumed, if the emotional pull was ever really as strong as they thought. And that wondering, it's uncomfortable. So yes, he might miss you. He might regret. He might even mean it, but never forget, returning doesn't automatically mean evolution. Sometimes people come back to rewrite the ending, not to rewrite themselves, and you no longer live in that chapter.